You're listening to the Literary Atlanta podcast. I'm Allison Law. Fall may have finally arrived in Atlanta, ushered in by remnants of Hurricane Michael, which by all accounts devastated my beloved Gulf Coast of Florida before hitting the Georgia coast, the Carolinas, and Virginia. It was 49 degrees here this morning. It's too soon to call it yet. I remember getting sunburned on my wedding day 15 years ago in 78-degree weather at the end of October, so it is too early to call it. Fall arrived earlier than usual for me this year, in mid-August. I haven't really talked about it here before, but I agreed to teach a couple of freshman comp classes. I've taught workshops and have spoken at numerous seminars and classes and book festivals, but I have never been up against 16-year-olds or 20-somethings, students who don't necessarily like to study English and are only in my class because it's a requirement for graduation. I have been humbled by how much time and commitment it takes to teach just a couple of classes, 2 days a week. I cannot imagine how pre-K through 12th grade teachers manage teaching all day, 5 days a week. Everything in my personal and professional life has been downgraded to on fire only as I've navigated the last 8 weeks of teaching. That includes this podcast, of course. And I'm trying to get back to editing and releasing episodes on a specific date and time, regular basis each week. But I hope you'll patiently await that magical time when that's going to happen, which is going to be sometime in December. In the meantime, I've been attempting to teach writing and literature to students who often don't read books, watch TV, or go to the movie theater. And since I don't watch a lot of YouTube and I don't game, I've struggled to find pop culture common ground where I can explain different types of stories, such as myths, parables, and fables, something I went over in the last couple of weeks with my kids. My 1102 students hadn't heard of Aesop's fables. They had been introduced to Greek and Roman mythology at some point in their secondary school career, and they were familiar with parables found in the Christian Bible. So I tried a more recent example of a parable or fable, a new book that came out just this week called The Next Person You Meet in Heaven. It's a relatively short read at 224 pages, which meets the criteria for being a parable or a fable. And it imagines the afterlife through the eyes of a young nurse named Annie, who feels like her life consists of a series of mistakes and bad choices until she's involved in a terrible accident and connects with people in heaven. My teenage students hadn't heard of this new book, but it's probably because it's a sequel to a book that came out when they were in pre-K or kindergarten. Have I mentioned the fact that I feel like an ancient myth when I'm around these students? Still, I know The Next Person You Meet in Heaven is destined to be another best-selling novel for Mitch Albom. He's bringing his new book to Atlanta this weekend, and my interview with him is next on episode 49 of Literary Atlanta. Atlanta is a book town, home to avid readers and host to some of the finest writers and storytellers on the planet. That's my thesis statement, and this podcast provides the supporting details through behind-the-scenes anecdotes, author interviews, and all of the ways that you can experience the rich literary landscape right here in Literary Atlanta. Mitch Albom is a best-selling author, screenwriter, playwright, and nationally syndicated columnist. He is the author of 6 consecutive #1 New York Times bestsellers. His book, Tuesdays with Morrie, is now the best-selling memoir of all time, and many of his books have been adapted into television movies. Mitch has used his platform as a writer to found 9 charities in Detroit, where he lives with his wife, Janine. And in 2010, after an earthquake devastated Haiti, Mitch took over a mission and orphanage in Port-au-Prince. He visits the island once a month and says that he and his wife, who have no biological children of their own, are now helping raise 42 kids. Mitch and his wife became even more attached to one of the orphans, a bright and snuggly girl whose nickname was Chica, when Chica was diagnosed with a rare brain tumor. The Alboms brought Chica to Michigan for treatment and traveled to other places around the world to save this girl they cherished as a daughter. But Chica succumbed to the tumor in 2017. Mitch wrote a beautiful story about that time for the Detroit Free Press this year. I'll include a link to the feature in the show notes. All of this influenced Mitch's latest novel, The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, which is a sequel to his 2003 book, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. I started our conversation by asking Mitch why he wanted to write the sequel.
Well, I'd never written a sequel before. I don't tend to write books that have characters that keep coming back. I'm not lucky enough to do a Jack Reacher or a Harry Potter or something like that.
Right.
So I never really had the option, and I've always kind of wanted to do something like that, but, as I say, many of my books don't lend themselves to it. The 5 People You Meet in Heaven was probably the exception, and of all the books that I've written, that's the one that I probably get the most questions from readers about, so what happened to Eddie next? Because the conceit of the book was the first stage of heaven is that you meet 5 people who are in your life who explain things that you didn't understand about your life to you. But I always said it was the first stage of heaven. So people would say, well, what was the second stage of heaven? And what happened to the little girl that Eddie saved in the first book? And in the last few years, I've had, sadly, some significant losses in my life that got me thinking a lot about heaven again. And I think those two things together just sort of said, well, if I'm ever going to do a sequel to that book, this is probably the time. It was 15 years later, nice round number. And I sat down to try to see if I could recapture the voice. And surprisingly, it didn't take more than, one read of the original book. And I remember exactly the voice I used and Eddie, the character, and I slid into it, and I really had a good time writing it.
I'm glad that you said voice, because as I understand it, this is the first time that you have written a book from the point of view of a woman. Uh-huh. Can you introduce us to Annie, your female protagonist?
Sure. Annie was introduced actually 15 years ago as a little girl at an amusement park where Eddie worked. Eddie worked there his whole life, never could escape. His whole thing was his life was meaningless. He ended up working in the same place where he had grown up. He took over his father's job, which he hated, and he thought fixing rides was just nothing in life, and he was going to die a nobody. Annie, in the first book, is this 8-year-old girl who's just at the pier, and she comes over and she says hi to Eddie, and Eddie makes her a little pipe cleaner animal, and he asks, where are your parents? And she says, my mom's with her boyfriend. And Eddie stops asking questions. And that's all we sort of see about Annie until moments later when there's an accident on a tower drop ride and the cart is loose and it's going to fall. Eddie starts screaming at everybody, get back, get back, get back. And he sees on the platform this little 8-year-old girl with her pipe cleaner animal. And she's on the platform underneath where the thing's going to fall, huddled and crying. And with no time to spare, he races forward and dives and just pushes her out of the way at the last second. And he's killed by the cart that crashes, that would have crashed on her. When the first book ends, all we know about Annie is that she lived on account of his efforts. And the last paragraph says that one day Annie will go to heaven and meet Eddie. Mm. In this book, The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, we see Annie grown up. And basically the theme of her whole life has been mistakes. She doesn't remember the actual accident that happened. She blacked it out. Her subconscious kind of blacked it out. And then before anyone could really tell her what had happened, her mother, who felt so guilty leaving her alone and this tragic accident happened, she takes her and whisks her away halfway across the country. They change their names. And her whole rest of her life, she just has this sort of vague feeling that she was involved in something when she was 8 years old that ended up causing her some physical harm, but she can't remember what it was, and it felt like a mistake. And all the rest of her life is haunted by feeling like a mistake. Everything she does is a mistake. And at the beginning of this book, she finally does something she thinks is right. She marries her her childhood sweetheart. And on their wedding night, they take a balloon ride, and the balloon ride goes bad, and there's a terrible accident, and she dies trying to save her husband. And then we begin our journey with her through heaven and her 5 people.
Yes. The thing that I liked about The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, Mitch, is when you talk about the relationship between Annie and her mother, and the fact that her mother keeps hidden from her the information that Eddie lost his life so that he could save Annie's life.
Right.
It made me think a lot about family dynamics and how sometimes the people who are closest to us don't share with us all of the information or the stories that would make us have different relationships with them.
That's right.
I wondered what you thought about that, or how you kind of constructed that relationship between the mother and daughter.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. And not only from my own mother, but from my mother's relationship with her mother. I've always been interested in the dynamic between mothers and daughters. I've written about the dynamic between mothers and sons. I wrote a book called For One More Day, which was really about that. Mm-hmm. But, being a son, you look over at daughter and mother, and I had a sister, and I could just tell my sister's relationship with my mother was different than mine. I don't know why, but it just was. And, one of the things that I saw go on between my mother and hers was secrets and family secrets that were sort of buried. And in the book, that's one of the things that Annie, it's not going to ruin it for everybody to say that one of the people Annie gets to meet in heaven is her mother. I think many people would love to meet their mother in heaven if she's passed. But they have a lot of reconciling to do. And one of the things they need to reconcile are these secrets and why the mother kept these secrets from the daughter. And, of course, in heaven, she gets it revealed to her that it was for protection. That's what most parents tend to keep secrets from their kids is, well, if you knew I thought it would hurt you, it would change you. You didn't need to know that. I remember my own mother wouldn't let me go to funerals when I was younger. If we had someone in the family had died, there was no hiding the fact that they had died, but she wouldn't take me to the funeral. And later when I was older, I said, why did you keep me from going to funerals? And she said, you didn't need to have that in your head at that age. You didn't need to see a cemetery and start thinking about that for your future. I was protecting you. I remember moments like that, and I know that as parents, we do things sometimes that we think are protecting the child, but we have no idea the effect it's having on the child. And of course, Annie, because her mother never told her that she was indirectly, anyhow, responsible for the death of a man, she never really understood why that day kind of haunted her. And only in heaven does she find it out when, of course, in the sort of pinnacle of the book, she meets Eddie, who saved her life. And he says, okay, I'm going to tell you the story now that's been haunting you your whole life, and everything's going to clear up.
And as you mentioned, Annie believes that her life and the milestones in her life are marked by mistakes that she has made.
Right.
And it reminded me, too, that sometimes we as human beings tell ourselves a narrative that isn't true. Do you think it's possible for us to be self-aware enough to kind of reconstruct a new narrative and change those mistakes into, I'm not a person who makes mistakes. I'm a person who's been informed by things that have happened in my life and am better for it.
Yeah. I'm a very hopeful person, and I believe people change all the time. I absolutely think that people can readopt that narrative. I hope that this book will be embraced by people who feel that they've made mistakes in life, look at their life as just a series of unfortunate events, to borrow a book title, and realize that it's just, if you change your point of view, you can actually maybe appreciate the good that's happening into your life. We only get so much time. To spend our time saying, oh, there, I screwed it up again, is a shame. We may find out later that it wasn't a screw up at all. So if people have someone who's like that in their lives, I hope they give them this book or share this book with them. If they're that way themselves, I hope they embrace it, because, we shouldn't have to wait until we die to find out that, hey, we weren't as bad as we thought.
Yeah. In your author's note, you say that the next person you meet in heaven is your version of the afterlife in this book is a wish, not dogma.
Right.
And
Right.
as someone who has been exploring some really deep questions and has been writing about the afterlife for more than 20 years now, how has your wish or version of an afterlife evolved?
Well, my first version of it, which is what inspired The Five People You Meet in Heaven, was based on a childhood experience, which I guess most of us, that's where we sort of form our ideas of heaven, is what we're taught or what we see. And I had an old uncle whose name was Eddie, who was the base of the character Eddie in both of these books. And he was a grizzled World War II veteran. And he told me a story of a night that he died on an operating table during open heart surgery. And he remembered floating above his body and looking down on his body on the table. And then he saw all of his dead relatives sitting by the edge of the table waiting for him. And of course, as kids, I'd hear this story, we'd say, "Uncle Ed, what did you do? What did you do?" He was a salty kind of old Army vet, and he said, "What did I do? I told him, get the hell out of here. I'm not ready for any use yet."
Yeah.
Apparently, he scared them right back into heaven, and he went back into his body, and he lived for a while. But for me, that was always my concept of the afterlife, because he was the only person I knew and trusted, who had one of those near-death experiences. So I always had an idea that the souls of the people who you've lost are there for you when you die. And I take great comfort in that, and I still believe that. I kind of fictionalized and expanded it in Five People and in The Next Person You Meet in Heaven by saying, well, they don't necessarily have to just be your relatives. Maybe it's just somebody that you had some interaction with once in your life, and you changed their life and they changed yours, and they're there to thank you or to explain that to you. I do believe that the souls of the people that we have lost, we will see again. And it's only strengthened, Allison, since I have gotten older, because I've lost more people.
Right.
And I want it to be true even more. And because I think I want it to be true, I think I believe it more. I just can't accept that I'll never have another conversation with my mother or my father again. I'll never have a conversation with our little girl, Chica, who we were raising, one of our orphans from Haiti, or hold her again, or feel her again, or talk to her again. I can't fathom that. And so I choose to believe that there is something after this, and that those experiences will go on.
Yeah. And I love that you dedicated the book to Chica, the little girl that you lost over a year ago. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. She was a blessing, and she was a gift. And there is, readers will see when they read the book that Annie, one of the mistakes that Annie makes in her life, of which she thinks there are so many, is that she got involved with a guy right out of high school, just as kind of in revolt against her mother, the absolute wrong guy for her. And she got pregnant, and she quickly got married to him, which was a mistake. And they had the baby, and the baby only lived a few days, and then dies. And she's haunted by that as a mistake getting pregnant. And then she must have done something wrong during the pregnancy, and that's why the baby died. And, she doesn't even feel like she's really a mother, because she only had 3 days with the baby. And in heaven, I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but she finds out what happened to her child. Let's put it that way. And, it's not a big stretch for people to figure out that I was writing about my own example of having a child too short and feeling like you didn't really get to be the full parent that you were supposed to be, and the child didn't get to be the full child. Chica indirectly sort of had an influence on that right away. And that's in the fiction version. I'm actually now working on a book, a nonfiction book about the whole experience with Chica and the kids in Haiti and all that. So she's had a big influence on my work.
Tickets are still available to see Mitch Albom at the Marcus Jewish Community Center of Atlanta this Saturday, October 13th at 8 p.m. The cost is $30 for members and $35 for the general public. The ticket price includes a hardcover copy of The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, and Mitch will be signing his books at MJCCA. Other book events happening around Atlanta this week include, on the same day, October 13th, Sam Maggs, the best-selling author of The Fangirl's Guide to the Galaxy and Wonder Women, brings her latest book, Girl Squads, 20 Female Friendships That Changed History, to Foxtail Bookshop. On October 14th, that's Sunday, Tina Clark, a writer and music producer who now calls Serenby home, will be in conversation with Susan Booth of the Alliance Theater at Woodruff Arts Center. Tina will be talking about her new memoir, Southern Discomfort. On October 16th, Kristen Conger and Caroline Irvin will be at the Margaret Mitchell House to help you be unladylike. This is the title of their new book, Unladylike, a field guide to smashing the patriarchy and claiming your space. Also on October 16th, an evening of poetry brought to you by the Georgia Center for the Book and Poets and Writers. They'll be presenting poets Louise Runyon, Thrower Star, and Robert Brown. That happens at 7:15 at the Decatur Library Auditorium. Thursday, October the 18th, Sarah Paretsky will be in conversation with Atlanta's own Karen Slaughter at the Norcross Cultural Arts Community Center. This event brought to you by the Gwinnett County Public Library. And I am happy to tell you that Paretsky's publisher, William Morrow Books, was nice enough to send me a copy of her latest book in the V.I. Warshawski series. It's called Shell Game. I'll be giving away a copy to one lucky Literary Atlanta listener on our website and via social media, so be sure to check that out. And go see these two masters of mystery and suspense in Gwinnett County on Thursday. Also on Thursday, one half of the Two Dope Queens. It's Phoebe Robinson at Agnes Scott College. Robinson will be talking about her follow-up to You Can't Touch My Hair. The new book is called Everything's Trash, But It's Okay. Listen to her at Agnes Scott College, Presser Hall, Gaines Chapel. This is a ticketed event from Karis Books and More. The purchase of a ticket includes a copy of Phoebe's brand new book, Everything's Trash, But It's Okay. You know, I just noticed I'm going back and forth. Usually what I do here, because I know you're interested in this, is I use the person that I'm interviewing, I use his or her or their first name, and then I use the formal surname for all of the other authors because I haven't really talked to them or met them necessarily, so I try to give them a more formal treatment. But I noticed that I've been talking about Tina and Phoebe like they're my friends. So again, this is why I'm not a great teacher. Please purchase your ticket to the Phoebe Robinson event through a link that you can find at the Karis Books and More website. Remember, when you can, support these local booksellers and the authors they're hosting by buying a copy of the book at the event. Thanks for listening to this episode. As always, you can find links to the people, books, and events mentioned in the podcast on our website at literaryatlanta.com. You can listen to episodes there or download them wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Stitcher, Radio Public, or TuneIn. I'm Allison Law, your host. Until next time, take care and stay lit curious.